I live in a little village in northern Thailand. It was a tight-knit community. Our neighbors are literally a stone's throw away, and the doors to our little huts are usually opened in the day. We visit each other to help out in chores, borrow necessities, or have a little chat so frequently it's kind of like we're all a big family. Being the eldest, I was in charge of bringing both my brothers to school and back home safely. The route is fairly safe and straightforward. Head towards the row of oak trees and make a right once we reach the river, following the bridge that takes us across the confluence, and stay on the well-defined dirt path for a couple of minutes until the school comes into view. Being little boys, we'd often spend some time playing along the river before going home. Dad had nothing against it, as long as we do not venture into the woods. He told us of a tale of the Bellflower Witch, one who resides in a small clearing deep in the forests, in the thunderstruck cedar tree, surrounded by reddish-black bellflowers. I can't recall every detail about the story, but it unsettled me quite a bit as a kid. I never strayed too far off our usual path to and from our school, and always walked home with a sense of urgency when the sun begins to dip behind the mountains. Just 2 days ago, I had my water bottle stolen from a monkey. Pissed off, I gave chase, but soon found myself on unfamiliar ground. Trees here towered over me, and the thick canopy blocked out most of the sunlight. Flowers I've never seen before were blooming in abundance, and I could see what looked like a lone stump in the distance. An overwhelming sense of dread filled the thick air as I realized the uncomfortable quietness that surrounded me. The silence deafened. My instincts told me that I shouldn't stay here any longer, and my feet promptly carried me in the opposite direction with haste. As I was running, I heard something a little strange. The twigs under my feet were snapping under my weight, but it sounded like they were breaking in rapid succession. They were much faster than the speed I was running at. It got louder as I ran, but the sounds just vanished into the woods as soon as I reached the river. The sight of glistening gold of the settling sun on the slow, floating waters comforted me, but something still didn't feel quite right. I ran home, and the feeling of unease only faded when our clustered huts came into view, much to my relief. I recounted the story to Dad, but told him it was a dream. He would have had my head if he knew I went into the woods alone. A look of concern spread across his face, but told me not to worry too much about it. He did reiterate that under no circumstances should any of us ever step foot into the woods alone. He left it at that, but I was certain he was hiding something from me. The next morning, I crept into my parents' room while they were out plowing the fields. I feigned a fever so I could stay in and looked everywhere for anything that may give me a clue as to what happened that day. After skimming through several books in my dad's collection, I found a small, poorly bound book with nothing written on the cover page. It piqued my interest, and I opened it to find several short poems, and one of it was titled The Bellflower Witch. My spine tingled as I read it. In the darkest hour of night, crimson bellflowers bloom. Let your gaze linger upon the blight. You'll be petrified by the inky gloom. She'll wiggle out from the back of her cedar. Bones crackle as she crawls with haste. Her delight reveals teeth stained with tar as the poor soul stays in a helpless daze. Piercing screams of agony resonate in this clearing that has long been forgotten. For every soul that crumbles to her fate, a blood-stained bellflower blossoms. That was when I realized that wasn't the sound of twigs snapping under my feet. I was being chased. Have you ever ventured into restricted areas out of curiosity? I did, once, and I certainly regretted that decision of mine. I was a fool. What happened inside that room was beyond my imagination. I wish I could erase those memories away. The screaming, the blood, the torture. Just a few weeks ago, I accompanied my father to the hospital. He has severe hypertension that needs to be kept in check, so the hospital sent him weekly reminders to come in for follow-ups. I was worried about his health, so I always sent him to the hospital and accompanied him throughout the appointment. As usual, I dropped him off at the A&E park for him to walk in, before finding a parking lot for myself. The jam outside was crazy. There were ambulances and tons of other cars and trucks all lined up. I saw how flustered the nurses and security guards and orderlies were, pulling out the wheelchairs and beds for the patients. It must have been a horrible accident. I found an empty lot, parked my car, and joined my father on level 4. It was where all the in-house specialists were. My father's queue number was called, and we went in together. The specialist needed to run a few blood tests and do a full body screening, so I was asked to come back in an hour's time. That was fine. I could grab myself a cup of coffee and wander around for a bit. I ordered myself a cup of latte and a strawberry cheesecake from the cafeteria. The weather was pretty good, sunny with the occasional wind breeze, so I decided to dine al fresco. From my view, I could see the nurses and doctors wheeling patients into the building. It was something I've grown used to. Since I visited the hospital at least once a week, I ordered a long black to-go for my father. As I walked back into the main building, the scene horrified me. There were many patients in hysterics. By that I meant screaming, shouting, and grabbing whatever and whoever they could. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Some began crying, some were begging for help. There were 2 of them who were puking all over the floor. The entire hospital seemed to be in a frenzy, busy registering patients, cleaning up vomit, attending to them, and doctors were all being called in one by one. The smell of the putrid vomit was too much to take, so I headed to level 3. At level 3, I bumped into one of the doctors whom I was friendly with. He helped perform CPR on my father after he collapsed from cardiac arrest. Even provided us with the help and support we needed after learning about my father's condition. He was known as Dr. Aaron, a young and aspiring cardiologist. "Hi, Dr. Aaron. How are you doing?" I greeted him politely.
"The usual. I hope your father's doing all right now,"
he smiled. And then he received a message on his phone. After reading it, his brows furrowed. Seemed like somebody summoned him for duty. "You heard of the accident yet?" I asked, curiously.
"Yeah, and I'm about to head there now."
He looked a little uncomfortable and walked off. This level was surprisingly peaceful as compared to the chaos going on downstairs. I wandered around, looking for the washroom, but there were no signs around. I couldn't even find a single soul in sight. Well, there was one, a nurse dozing off at her desk, but I didn't want to trouble her. Anyway, I walked around the building when I discovered a staff-only area. It looked pretty out of place, but I guess there had to be a washroom in there, right? How would people manage to work on this level if they didn't have an accessible toilet? I pushed the door open and was greeted by an empty, lit hallway. There was a blue sign with 2 stickmen leading to the right. I figured it could be the washrooms. As I walked down the hallway, I heard sounds. I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. Sounds of muffled screams, drilling, and the humming of machines. I had previously worked in a dentist clinic. These sounds were kind of familiar to me. I continued walking, and then I noticed a few doors that were lined right opposite each other. There weren't any handles. I tried pushing the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried sliding it aside, but it wouldn't open too. For a moment, I really felt like an idiot. I hope no one saw that. I continued walking to one of the doors where the sign stopped at. It was where the drilling was coming from. There was a small peephole, a window just as big as an Instagram square, where I saw 2 figures pinning someone down on the bed. A shadow loomed over the person being pinned down. He was holding onto a drill and heading straight for the eyes. I gasped in horror and pinned myself onto the wall. I hope no one saw me. I peered again. They all started to drill. There was a tank next to them. It was slowly filling up. I could hear the muffled screams and cries of whoever was lying right there and probably dying, but I couldn't possibly barge in just like that. Till today, I still ask myself this question. Was it selfish of me? Then there came a loud thumping sound, followed by a crack. It sounded very much like an angry person trying to knock the door down. I didn't dare to look anymore. What the hell was going on? I bolted down the hallway, running back to where I came from until I finally collided with the nurse who was dozing off. She looked a little shocked, muttered an apology, and rushed the other doctors and nurses whilst holding onto a clipboard. They were wheeling patients from that accident into the rooms I just saw. And then I remembered why I was even in this hospital in the first place. My father.
I'm a 33-year-old man who works part-time as an Uber Eats delivery guy. I initially signed up for it because I heard from my friends about Uber and how you can make easy money as a part-time job. I work from 9 to 5, recently broken up, and don't have many hobbies other than World of Warcraft, so I had a lot of time on my hands. Overall, Uber sounded like a great idea, until recently. This is my most horrifying incident and experience that occurred in my life, scarring me till this very day, and I try and forget about it as much as I can, but it keeps crawling back to me. Anyways, I was doing my regular shifts for Uber Eats. One specific evening around 10 p.m., I get a notification from Uber saying that there's a delivery for me. The destination was far off from the city, somewhere remote and quiet. I decided that it was a good way to earn money, and I had a lot of time to spare since I usually slept late. I followed the instructions: get extra sauce, ask for more napkins, and keep their food warm and wrapped. I got their food and started driving towards the destination. It took much longer than I had originally anticipated. I kept driving, and all I saw were dozens of trees upon dozens of trees. Finally, when I had arrived, I realized that it looked old and abandoned. The closest house would be a couple kilometers away, and this house was not painted or renovated or anything of that sort. My guts instantly told me that this was not a good idea, but I accepted the offer and I must deliver. So I went up to the door. There was no doorbell, so I just knocked as loud as I can. From the backyard shed I heard,
I'm right here.
from an older gentleman. He looked about early to mid-60s. He He was harmless, I told myself. Assuming that he was disabled, I took the food and walked towards the shed. As I approached it, I smelled this horrible smell, like something decomposing. As I reached close to 6 feet away from him, he pulled out a gun on me and told me to drop everything I had. I didn't know what to do, so I dropped the food and put my hands up. All of a sudden, the bushes on his left and my right started rustling loudly. He quickly pointed his gun at that direction, and a raccoon burst out of the bushes, and I just bolted. I never ran as fast as I did that day in my life. I got into my car and I heard gunshots, and I drove as fast and as far as I could. I ended up not calling the cops because by the time I was thinking straight again, it was already 2 hours since that incident, and I knew that the area he was camping in was not his actual house.
I can swear on my life that this is a true story. I don't remember how old I was, but I can remember that my sister Rhonda and Stacy and I were at home with my mom and dad. I'm the baby out of 5 kids, all of whom are girls except one. Anyhow, as always, Rhonda and Stacy were getting ready to go out on a Friday night, so she was in our room getting ready. We have a little AC unit in our bedroom window, directly in front of our dresser, which had 2 mirrors on it. While Rhonda was curling her hair, I was, as always, bugging her and asking her to let me go with her. She was my big sister who I loved more than life, but of course the answer was no. A couple of seconds later, I heard screams coming from our room where Stacy and Rhonda were. Like I had never heard screams before. My dad and mom came barging into the room. Rhonda kept screaming that something was outside of our bedroom window while Stacy was panicking. Our dad runs out to the back door and searches around, looking for any possible suspects. When my sister, Rhonda, finally calmed down and was able to speak again, she described it as having red eyes and over 7 feet tall. My dad came back minutes later and couldn't find anything or anyone. Needless to say, my parents didn't believe a word she said. The strangest part was that about 2 months later, Rhonda took a call from my parents about 3 a.m. My sister was killed by someone she knew. It was also sudden, but I won't bother you with the details. Then, in 1994, my sister Rhonda was also killed in a car accident involving a drunk driver. This all happened while I still remembered those haunting screams that night in the back of my mind. Could it be that the red eyes are a curse? Whoever sees them has died, and for I never seen them, and my dad never found it. Rhonda, on the other hand, nothing ever scared her like that. Could the red eyes have been a warning? I woke up with a jolt. I don't know what this feeling is, but it's strange and uncomfortable, yet oddly familiar. I'm a male, 26 years old, still working on my PhD. I'm a very punctual guy. I go to sleep at 12 a.m. sharp and wake up at 8 a.m. That's exactly 8 hours of sleep. But after laying in bed for what seemed like an eternity and not being able to sleep, I could tell something was wrong. I've been going on and off for dating. and I always set my priorities as school first, and would break up with my girlfriend if they were a burden. I had this girl back in first year of university. She was by far the clingiest girl I have ever dated. And for those who are curious, I've broken a total number of 4 hearts. I don't regret any of them because they were too much to handle. The girlfriend I had back in first year was the second one I dated. Even though I broke up with her, she kept trying to get in touch with me, even though I showed no interest. Eventually she gave up after a year, or so I thought. I rolled around in bed, feeling uncomfortable all over my body. I got up and looked at the time. 2 a.m. I had class in the morning the next day, and I couldn't afford to lose any more sleep. And so I started jogging on the spot to try and make my body more exhausted, but it didn't work. I went out of my room and grabbed some dumbbells and started lifting weights. Saying it now, it sounds stupid, but I was desperate to try and get some sleep. I finally dropped down and did some push-ups. Just as I got down to the ground, I saw 2 eyes staring at me. Red, bloodshot eyes right beneath my bed. I freaked out and ran out of my door. I called the cops with my cell phone and told them that there was someone in my house while I ran outside and into the night. They said they would be there as fast as they could. While I waited, I ran around my building and hid in my neighbor's bushes. It was the perfect spot because I could see my room. My lights were still on, and I just stared into my room wondering who the hell was in there. Suddenly a head popped up. It was my ex. She got up off of my bed and stood right in front of the window. I wasn't sure if I was caught, but I got the nerves and started walking back into my house. I was full of rage. I tried to get this girl out of my life, but she just keeps getting closer and closer to me, and even had the guts to break and enter my house. I barged into my room and confronted her face to face. I asked her what the hell she was doing, and all she did was grin. After seconds of an awkward silence, she finally told me that she was in my room the entire day and didn't eat anything or drink anything. She then asked me if I had food to offer her. I don't know what kind of drugs she was on, but I yelled at her and told her that I called the cops and they're on their way. She then pulls out a gun on me and aims it at me. A fucking pistol. A fucking Glock. I wasn't afraid. She was skinny and lanky. I toppled over her at least a foot, but the scariest part was the way she looked at me. Her red eyes staring straight into my soul, and she had full intent of killing me. That was when I heard the sirens. They were outside my house, so I told her I wouldn't press charges against her if she dropped the weapon down and surrendered. Fortunately, she obliged, and the police came in soon after.